Hi, and welcome to another episode of Homeopathy Simplified. And I'm Jonathan DeMonte, a homeopath and Bowen therapist. And I'll just introduce myself briefly. So I discovered homeopathy through my father, who in the late 60s was one of the key influences in homeopathy's resurgence in Europe at that time. And I was really fortunate to study homeopathy through his own students. And I partly feel a very strong connection to his career as a result. I also, after beginning my homeopathic practice, learned a therapy called Bowen therapy. And through that and homeopathy, I developed a practice specializing in chronic pain and disease. And so after 27 years, I've come full circle, and I want to share the journey of my learning. And I've made a purpose of teaching a course that is the one I wished I'd had in the very beginning of my career. A course created to make the complex simple and shine a path through a forest of ideas and misconceptions even about homeopathy. So this is episode 6, and it's entitled, or titled, I should say, it is entitled to be called Homeopathy Simplified. Why is the podcast called Homeopathy Simplified? So just a quick note that if you've enjoyed the podcast, then please consider giving it a like, following the links to get notices about the podcast or the video YouTube version of the podcast. And in the notes of each audio podcast and video podcast on YouTube, you'll see a link to receive a guide I've created entitled 22 Back Remedies, and a guide to 22 back remedies, and it shows you how to use those. And in a future episode, I'll actually go through that and show how to use it to its best advantage. So from it, you'll learn how to select remedies for common conditions like back spasm, bulging discs, sciatica. And as a Bowen therapist that used homeopathy, I can say that it really helped my work enormously. So use this 22 remedies for back problems to support your patients between visits and see how well they respond overall to both the remedy and your other treatments. So give it a try, and you'll find the link to follow in the notes. So simplified in the dictionary means made less complicated, made clearer, or easier. And for every homeopath, we look to do that, and for every professional, actually. But let's first look at what's complicated about homeopathy. And so first and foremost, one of the things we do in homeopathy is we choose a remedy on all of the symptoms of the patient. We call that the totality of symptoms. And so when you think of someone who has a long history, a complicated story involving that history, and complex pathology, you can imagine it would take quite a bit of time. And so that's actually true. And we want to explore ways in which that time is cut shorter. And the second point here, we don't prescribe solely on the disease name or a pathology report. So if a person has low thyroid, we don't give homeopathic iodine or thyroid. We give a remedy based upon other symptoms that might be out of balance along with their low thyroid function, supposing it's that. Or if someone has Graves' disease or Addison's and other hormonal conditions, we would not give a remedy based on the disease. We would give a remedy by working through the whole symptomology of the patient, the symptoms that have arisen since becoming sick. That's what we use to find a remedy that has all of those symptoms. So again, it could take a lot of time. In point 3, there are now 3,600 plus remedies in the homeopathic pharmacy to choose from. And that's a very large number. Imagine a pharmacist having to manage 3,600 remedies, medicines. That's nowhere near that in a traditional pharmacy. So the complexity is much increased as a result of the increase in remedies. So for myself, my memory is fair to middling, and I could never imagine memorizing 3,600 remedies, let alone 150 of the most commonly used homeopathic remedies. So again, complexity. So there's also the factor of time, and the best homeopaths I know take ample time to take the case of a patient. That means, as I said earlier, the whole history, the whole expression of all the ways that person is ill. We need to take careful note. And if anyone has been to a homeopath, you'll know that they ask some interesting questions about the symptoms. So to differentiate, point two, to differentiate and choose a medicine also takes time, especially if there's so many now. That means you need to compare remedies that could fit the case and try and choose the most fitting. Again, very time consuming. And then thirdly, feeling confident as a prescriber is a somewhat rare situation. You really only know without doubt after the remedy's been taken and there's a reaction to it, whether your selection was correct. And because we're looking at multiple symptoms at the same time, it's sometimes more complex for you and the patient to uncover what has changed since taking the remedy. So again, very time consuming. And now we come to the tools of homeopathy, which in and of themselves are useful and helpful to make your choices of medicines. And there are very many types of books. So the category here are called materia medica. And materia medica, I might have one here. This is a French materia medica. I don't know if you can see it. And it lists remedies and the symptoms that they treat. And those can be clinical materia medicas, clinical materia medicas, for instance, those books focusing on arthritis, for example, or respiratory conditions, or cancer, and so on. And then materia medica that we call pure. And these are materia medicas defined upon the experimentation of homeopaths who described the effects of medicines when they were healthy, and they were experimenting by taking those medicines to elicit what are the symptoms that that medicine produces. Remember, homeopathy, we treat like with like. And so some of that data of pure materia medicas is from hundreds of years ago, from the foundations of homeopathy and the founders of it. And imagine 250 years ago, the language was quite different than what we speak now. So we also have to translate the language. Other books are what are called repertories. I have a nice repertory here. One of my favorites, The Synthesis by Frederick Schroyans. And in it, you'll see paragraphs of symptoms. And if I read just from here, this is the mind section. We have jealousy, and all of the remedies that are known to have jealousy as a pathology in the ill state are listed there. So we have bedside repertories that you can refer to quickly for acute issues like coughs, colds, injuries, etc. And then compendiums of repertories for specific pathologies, for instance, maternity care or childhood illnesses, etc. And then another big area of the tools that we use in homeopathy are computer tools. So there are many different software tools that hopefully make the work easier and faster for a homeopath, but not really. You still have to discern the symptoms and then differentiate the results of those symptoms, the results of the remedies that cover those symptoms. And these are just a few of the brand names of the software that are available. And in these softwares, all very similar, we have literally hundreds of books that are cross-referenced in our search for remedies that match the symptoms of the patient. Another important tool set are the pharmacy, the remedies, their availability, the cost of them, and even the quality is in question sometimes. So having a pharmacy, should you have it in your own office, should you have an affiliation with a pharmacist or health food store, and so on. And so for many people who call me, for example, it comes down to having a remedy shipped to them, as opposed to them being able to find it locally. And then I want to go through what makes homeopathy simple. And even though some of these subjects are complex in and of themselves, but they are logical. And the first and foremost is the philosophy. What is the philosophy of homeopathy? How is it defined? What is its principles? What are the mechanisms of action that define it? And what are the scientific principles behind the philosophy? Are those validatable and reproducible? So this is what we learn in the beginnings of our study in homeopathy, is to understand the philosophy, because it is a little different than giving a medicine for a headache. We don't give a medicine for a headache in homeopathy. We give a medicine for the state of illness that a person is in with a headache. Sure, the headache is one symptom, but there are also many others that are out of balance. Then we talk about the language. I mentioned earlier that the language of homeopathy is medical, for one. It's also historical, for two, and antique in a way. And yet, if you learn it, it becomes very simple. And we use the language the patient uses. So if the patient describes their symptom in certain words, we look for that symptom in those same words or their equivalent. And so the language is very important in homeopathy. We sit, we listen, we don't infer ideas upon the description of the patient. We really listen, and if we can use that information and translate it into a reliable symptom in homeopathy, we can. And so these are the ways we work as homeopaths. And then, of course, the symptoms themselves, as I'm saying in describing the point 2 about language, symptoms are not inferred. They are as they are. So if you feel hot in a cold room, that's a symptom, that's a fever. And that is described a certain way. How you manage that fever is described a certain way. Maybe you want to be fanned, maybe you want to take your clothes off, maybe you want to jump in a hot shower, who knows? But the way we are in the state. And then the remedies themselves are very simplistic. We have a large amount of data as homeopaths on what are the effects of remedies. Just the proving symptoms where the remedies were experimented on gives an enormous amount of data. And now we also have hundreds of years of their use to add to the knowledge base about those remedies. And then the management of patients and the effects of the remedies that we give them. That's also very logical, very simple. And so just to sum up about what is simple here, it's easy to learn about homeopathy. It really is. If you learn the right information and then the right methodology and management, you have every possibility of great success with this wonderful medicine. So in homeopathy, we've developed shortcuts, and of course, certain remedies are known for their disease name. So arnica is known for its state of shock, whether it's a physical shock or an emotional shock after injury. We know that to be a very strong symptom of arnica, and we would lean on that for sure. Drosera is a remedy known for coughs. And then keynotes of symptoms. So for example, the remedy lycopodium has a time of aggravation very commonly in its picture, worse in the afternoon. And there are many, many, many keynotes that describe the remedies that we would think of when a person has that. But it also, the problem with keynotes is that you have to remember them or have a resource for them, and that comes only with experience. So that's, for a beginner homeopath, that's not a useful shortcut. And it's actually a cheat sheet that doesn't necessarily get you to think or see clearly what's really going on. So we'll come to what is a solution for that. Another method of shortcut is creating archetypes for the individuals. So sepia, known as the overwhelmed mother who's just become withdrawn and wants to escape. Sulfur, the ragged philosopher type, and so on. And those are archetypes, but you are, again, inferring an idea on your patient. Then we come to the emotional states, remedies for grief, remedies for shock, remedies for anger, and so on. These can be very useful because these are easily found states, but again, they can pigeonhole. And then my favorite of the shortcuts are checklists, and using a checklist to define the case is extremely useful. It's time-saving. You can have a list of reliable symptoms, and if you have a collection of reliable symptoms from a checklist, the likelihood of finding a suitable remedy is expanded enormously. So that is my personal favorite. And, this is what we teach in the Homeopathy Simplified course, how to do things that are complex in as simple a manner as possible that is reliable. So I hope you liked it, this podcast, and send me a message about it. Please do. Also like it. It helps a lot. And then follow the link to get the guide to 22 back remedies. Thank you very much. See you at the next one.